I'm Edward October. The sound you hear is wedding bells. Somebody just got hitched. There, in that old country chapel, in the shade of that shaggy old willow. This is the start of Octoberpod.
Don't let anyone tell you there's no such thing as ghosts. They're real, and they're all around us. But maybe they're not quite what we think they are. This thing that happened to me, gosh, it had to be 20 years ago, probably more. Back before streaming services and before everyone had a digital camera in their pockets. I was an undergrad, and I had convinced myself that I wanted to get an MFA in film. So I tried to get jobs at movie theaters and video rental stores during breaks as a way to build up a resume for a budding career in film that never got off the ground. There were a half dozen video stores in town, a Blockbuster, a crappy shop inside the food country, and 2 or 3 mom and pops. I got a gig as a clerk for Interstate Video, right next to the old Big Lots in my town. Now this store had a videography side business, which meant they'd go and videotape your wedding, graduation, bar mitzvah, whatever, and give you a professionally edited video of it. I told my boss about my film school aspirations and talked my way into a side gig as a junior videographer. It was fun work, but I had to attend so many goddamn weddings. I can't tell you how many times I filmed a bride dancing with her father to Butterfly Kisses. Gross. My job was basically shoot B-roll. My partner, an older guy named Donnie, he was the senior videographer. He shot all the A-list footage and then edited the tapes from our 2 cameras together in the back room at Interstate Video. And so this fucked up thing happened at a wedding we videotaped one August. The wedding ceremony was held at this Lutheran church on the edge of town. It was funny, it felt like we were far out in the country, out in the middle of nowhere. But we were, in fact, just 1 block over from the town's busy historic Main Street. A street festival was in full swing. Tourists were everywhere and the streets were clogged with pedicabs giving sightseers tours. But you'd never be able to tell from the wedding venue. It was a beautiful church, especially compared to some of those podunk old churches we usually covered, or that one wedding we did inside the bingo hall. The church was on a lot adjacent to a historical site, a Civil War battlefield or something. They had converted it to a memorial park with a big pavilion on it. So when the ceremony was over, everyone just walked over to the pavilion for the reception. Oh, so where was I? Oh yeah, beautiful church. So whenever I shot video, I'd take every opportunity to show off my skills, in case Donnie would notice during editing. I love the films of Mario Bava. And, God, this is nerdy. Bava would do this thing where he'd zoom into an object that catches the light, like a candle, a flame, or chandelier, and then dial down the focus until the light becomes fuzzy, abstract shapes before dissolving to the next shot. And I was messing around with the camera's manual zoom and manual focus before the ceremony. I was trying to replicate Bava's zoom dissolve effect on a stained glass window that was backlit by the sunlight and glowing really nicely. In the process of doing that, I noticed 2 things. The first was some fancy old English lettering on the back wall of the sanctuary. It said, "I am the way and the truth and the life." Except the lettering they used was so ornate that the word truth looked more like truck. And this cracked me up until I noticed that second thing. It was a very thin person, all dressed in orange from head to toe, with a hood pulled down to cover most of their face. Whatever they were wearing, it was loose and baggy on them, and it resembled a ceremonial robe, or a shroud. At first I thought it was someone very old because of their, I guess, hunched over posture. And although I couldn't see this person's eyes, I could still tell that they were staring at me. It was creepy. And then Donnie tapped me on the shoulder and we started setting up our shots for the ceremony, and I forgot all about it. So the beautiful wedding was beautiful. Truly. It was maybe the nicest, sweetest wedding I'd ever shot. The reception was cool too. The groom and his mom danced to a Rainbow Connection, which was really cute. The bride, who looked positively luminous, and her father danced to What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. A refreshing change from butterfly kisses. The wedding cake was lemon chiffon, the groom's cake was red velvet, and decorated to look like a giant Reuben. I stole a piece of both. Both were delicious. It was right at sunset, and the reception started winding down so that everyone could throw birdseed at the bride and groom as they rode off into the sunset. Now, I'd shot a lot of weddings and seen newlyweds drive off in limos, stretch limos, party buses, horse-drawn carriages, classic cars, a fire truck, and once even a canary yellow monster truck called Big Skillet. But this couple, they drove off in one of those pedicabs from the main street. They're also called cycle rickshaws, but pedicab sounds less cringe. If you've never seen one of these, it's just an open-top carriage or a wagon, usually big enough to hold 2 people on a bench seat. And it's pulled by a bicycle. This particular one could hold 4 passengers facing each other. Now this presented a technical challenge for us, because they wanted us to video their pedicab ride down Main Street, which was, as you will recall, only a block over. Even though it was a 4-seater, it was too tight for 4 people, plus bulky camera and equipment. So Donnie told me to stay behind and shoot the departure from outside the pedicab, and he'd shoot from the inside. This was all cool to me because that meant I could hang back, pack up our gear, and maybe scavenge some cake and some of those little bite-sized ham biscuits. Pedicab wasn't gone for more than 5 minutes, and the wedding guests left behind started to thin out. I remember I was alone and hauling gear on the shaded pathway between the pavilion and the church. And then, I can't explain it. It was like a wind swept its way towards me, but not a wind of air. A wind made of nervous energy and dread. None of the wedding guests were near me, but after a while it seemed that they had all started to murmur and then pack closer to one another, and then they were all around me. And before I knew it, I had moved as part of the crowd of wedding guests like a driftwood on an ocean wave, and then we were on the sidewalk on the main street amidst a lot of shouting and weeping, and somewhere a little ways off groans of people in pain, and now the fire and rescue vehicles were arriving, and with them the horror of shrieking sirens and a confusion of objects lit up in alternating red and blue lights, now bodies being pulled from twisted metal and pavement and stretched onto gurneys and pushed into an ambulance. So, what happened was this. Bride and groom's pedicab left the venue and pulled into the main street. I don't know who was at fault. That's been hotly discussed in the civil suits that follow, but whatever. A large pickup truck, a Ford F-150 or something like that, swerved out of his lane and struck the pedicab from behind. The truck wasn't even going fast, but it didn't need to be. The driver of the truck would later say in his deposition that he'd swerved to avoid hitting a pedestrian in a University of Tennessee hoodie. No one was able to back that statement up, though. From what I understand, the passengers were all catapulted out of the cab. Donnie and our camera equipment were tossed onto the pavement. It destroyed his leg. I'm not sure how many surgeries and pins and plates he needed to put his leg back together, but Donnie walks with a pronounced limp to this day. Pedicab driver got off easier with a broken collarbone and some bumps and scrapes. The bride and groom weren't so lucky. People who'd been there to see the accident happen said that those two went sailing through the air. The groom struck his head on a parking meter. He would be pronounced dead an hour or 2 later after being med-flighted to a head trauma unit. The bride landed on a parked Volkswagen and suffered a fair amount of damage to her spine and broke about every bone on one side of her face. I mean, what can I say? It was a horrible tragedy. I spent the rest of the evening feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. I made it back to the wedding venue with the rest of the wedding guests. I remember there was a lot of sobbing, but I had a very particular problem on my hands. I was stuck there. Donnie had been my ride to the wedding, but he was being rushed to the ER, presumably with the keys in his pocket. I had to call my dad to pick me up, and I was the last one to leave. So I had a lot of time to contemplate mortality and fate and the whole Megillah while sitting on the steps of a church that became creepier and creepier as the sun sank beneath the horizon. Over the remainder of the summer, interstate video became lawsuit central. It seemed like every day someone new came in asking questions about the accident. Many of them came in requesting copies of Donnie's video. Yeah, I forgot to mention that in addition to Donnie's leg, all of our camera equipment got destroyed. The camera Donnie was using to shoot the pedicab ride got broken into a dozen little pieces, but somehow the SVHS tape he'd been recording on was undamaged and had recorded the whole accident. Lawyers for the truck driver wanted to examine the video to try and locate the person in the UT hoodie that the truck had swerved to miss. And representatives from the bride's family, the deceased groom's family, and even the pedicab company came for their own copies of it. I remember Donnie came to the store one day. He was in a wheelchair and went into the back room where he played the tape of the accident for our boss and another of my coworkers who had swung by to pick up her paycheck. I left the room and stood behind the front counter because I couldn't bear to watch it. I could still hear it though. The screaming, the sounds of the people moaning in pain. It was like listening to a snuff film. I guess in a way it was a snuff film. Well, the summer ended and I left town with my fall semester starting back up. When I came back home for winter break, I pulled a few shifts at Interstate Video because they needed seasonal help and I needed some cash. One day, it must have been between Christmas and New Year's, I opened up the store and I saw that Donnie had left a note for me saying that someone would be by to pick up a wedding video that he'd left behind the counter. Donnie didn't say the video was from the truck crash wedding, as people around the video store began calling it. But when I saw the person coming to get it, I knew what she was coming for. It was the bride from the accident, though she was unrecognizable. Her face was badly scarred and malformed on one side. Her posture was stooped and twisted, and she was struggling to walk with a tripod cane. She was having such a difficult time walking that I wondered how in the world was she walking around alone without someone to help her. She was wearing an orange hooded sweatshirt from her alma mater, the University of Tennessee, and matching orange sweatpants. But she lost a lot of weight and her clothes were hanging from her twisted frame, almost like ceremonial robes or an orange shroud. I know you won't believe me, but I swear in the name of Jesus that she was the same figure in orange I had seen when I was looking at that funny writing on the wall at her wedding. The writing that I thought had said, "I am the way and the truck and the life." The vacant expression in her eyes as she stared at me from beneath the orange hood, the way she stooped and hobbled about, the loose drape of her clothes, it was her. What I had seen at the wedding was the same broken woman, and how was that possible? We didn't really speak much, only saying what was necessary to hand over the videotape that she'd come by to pick up. And then she was gone. But I swear to Christ I've seen her before. Had I had a premonition of the accident while we were setting up for the wedding? And what about the guy who'd crashed the truck into the pedicab? He said he'd swerved to miss a pedestrian in an orange University of Tennessee hoodie. I rushed into the back room where Donnie edited videos and rummaged around until I found the tape of the accident. I slid it into one of the store's super VHS editing decks and queued it up to the accident. Donnie had captured the moment the truck made impact. It was hard to make out any details, especially among the crowds on the main street, because as soon as the truck hit, the camera went flying. I ran it back and replayed it several times until finally, at the edge of the frame, I saw, or thought I saw, a twisted blur of a thin woman in a baggy orange hoodie.
Welcome to Brew Crime, a true crime and beer podcast.
This is a podcast where we pick a theme, cover a few cases, and pair them with craft beer.
Join me, Mike,
And me, JT.
as we explore the world of crime, conspiracies, or whatever catches our attention. You can find us on social media at Brewcrime or our website, brewcrime.com. And you can find us on any podcast app at Brewcrime Podcast.
Join us as we discuss the horrible crimes that surround us and maybe, definitely tip a bottle or two back as you do it. Drink with us the second and last Tuesday of every month.
If you like weird, spooky, and strange history, then I have the podcast for you. My name is Brenda, and I'm the host of Horrifying History. Are you into the dark side of history? Horrifying History tells you about the side of history that people don't normally talk about. We tell the tales of haunted places, infamous true crimes, the paranormal, and unsolved mysteries, and then we look to history to see where the truth actually lies. Want to get spooky with us? Get your Horrifying History fix by subscribing today on Spotify, Spreaker, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
A man in Brazil dies from severe burns, maybe from a UFO. In Washington, D.C., Jack the Slasher breaks into a house and barely steals anything, but dumps molasses all over a piano and cuts up curtains and sofas. I'm Andrew Gable, and on Forgotten Darkness, I'll look through old newspapers and other sources to find those lesser-known stories of yesteryear. I look mostly at true crime and unexplained phenomena. So if either of those topics sounds like your sort of thing, check us out. You can find the podcast at forgottendarkness.podbean.com or on most podcast apps.
I'm Edward October. For more true, true-ish, and classic tales of horror and the paranormal, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to ring the bell so you don't miss anything. Or find all of our links at octoberpodvhs.com. Octoberpod, retro horror for bold individualists.